On this edition of the continuing series, the CBS Video Library of World War II, we'll focus on the period when the Allies were on the offensive throughout Europe and were pushing the Nazis back toward Berlin. We'll be in Paris as the triumphant French and their General Charles de Gaulle reclaimed their honor and their city. We'll take part in one of the largest airdrops in military history as we join the paratroops and gliders going into the Netherlands at a place called Arnhem on a September day in 1944. We'll watch as American soldiers sprint across a bridge that history should never forget, the bridge at Remagen. It proved to be one of the luckiest breaks in military annals. And we'll have the story of the greatest mechanized army of World War II and of its legendary leader, the Army of the American Third, the leader, General George S. Patton. We begin with the story of Paris, of a Paris enslaved, of a Paris freed. Surrender and dishonor give way to resistance, and after 4 years, the eventual liberation of the City of Light. We look back now to World War II and the story of Paris.
June 14th, 1940. Paris is on her knees. Her citizens gather in the streets to hear their German master's voice. How has it happened? On May 10th, after 8 months of the so-called phony war, the Germans had loosed Blitzkrieg, a new kind of mechanized warfare based on a book published by an unknown French officer named Charles de Gaulle. 2 months later, Paris has been declared an open city to spare it from the Blitz.
Le gouvernement allemand déclare en outre solennellement et expressément qu'il ne formulera aucune revendication vis-à-vis de la flotte française lors de la conclusion de la paix.
On June 14th, the Nazis march in. Even General von Briesen's normal Prussian reserve melts at the joy of having Paris at his feet. July 1940. Paris tries to get back to normal. But how can things be normal when the famous Grand Boulevards and sidewalk cafes are full of the hated Nazis? By now, France has surrendered. In her time of crisis, she had called Marshal Pétain, hero of World War I, now aged 84. Pétain's first act as premier had been to ask for an armistice. It had been signed on June 22nd. The French people are stunned. 2 million Frenchmen are prisoners of war. 2/3 of France, including Paris, is occupied. In Paris, shortages began to appear. First, the Germans behave correctly. It is easier to occupy a city whose residents are treated correctly. There are some Parisians who accept this correctness and enjoy the victor's company. But to most, the Nazis are contemptuously known as string beans from the green of their uniforms. And their presence, enjoying the sights of Paris, only makes the shame of defeat the more humiliating. The era of German correctness does not last long. Food in France is still plentiful and pours into Paris's world-famed marketplace, Les Halles. Food in Germany is not plentiful. To the victors belong the food. They take it by the trainload. By 1941, Parisians are on starvation diets. Rations provide less than half the calories needed for health. There is almost no milk. The Germans call for volunteers to work in Germany. If you don't volunteer, your family gets no ration cards. 600,000 French workers agree to go. In Paris, stations are jammed as families say au revoir. For many, there will be no reunion. Marshal Pétain, dancing to the Nazis' tune, discards the passwords of the French Revolution. In their place come work, family, country, and inequality. Jews must wear the Star of David. It makes them easier to round up for shipment in cattle cars to the crematoriums of Auschwitz, Belsen, Buchenwald. Oppression builds resistance. It starts slowly. 4 days before the signing of the armistice, Charles de Gaulle, the same obscure French officer whose book on mechanized warfare had inspired the Germans, had flown to London and sounded the call for French resistance. At first, most resistance groups merely publish clandestine newspapers. By 1944, some will have a weekly circulation of over 50,000. From London, de Gaulle, all but unknown in France, becomes a symbol. He tells the men and women of France that the call will come once again for France to stand up to the enemy.
La France va se voir telle qu'elle est, inébranlable dans sa fraternité.
Listening at forbidden radios, they hear him say, waiting for the call, free people recognize the voice which for so many centuries has roused them and carried them forward, the eternal voice of France.
La voix éternelle de la France. La France avec nous.
Waiting for the call, the resistance arms. Its flag is the Cross of Lorraine, flag of Joan of Arc, and also the emblem of the French tank division which General de Gaulle had commanded. The fighting underground movement, the men who have fled to the hills and taken the French name for underbrush, maquis, probably never numbers over 350,000. But their work is effective. At war's end, General Eisenhower will estimate that the services of the combined French resistance armies were worth 15 divisions to the Allies. One of the underground specialties is sabotage, carefully planned, devastating, and often spectacular. The Nazis answer sabotage with death. Each day in Paris, new rolls appear. The following hostages were shot in reprisal for acts of resistance. In 4 years of occupation, the lists of dead in Paris alone will pass 75,000 civilians. In spite of the risks, the resistance grows. Underground presses in the heart of Paris print false ration and identity cards. With papers like these, hundreds of Allied airmen shot down over France are repatriated through Paris. Here, with the resistance guide, are 3 such flyers, 2 Americans and an Englishman. The resistance man asks, "Have you seen Paris?" "No," they reply. "Would you like to?" They would. And so, for a lark, the resistance takes them on a tour of the city and, using hidden cameras, photographs the trip. Remember, as you watch these men in civilian clothes visit Paris's most famous sights, that the penalty for being caught is death. These incredible motion pictures, made literally under the noses of the Germans in broad daylight on the streets of Paris, indicate how well the resistance is organized by the spring of 1944. The audacity of this trip through Paris is typical of the underground's mounting confidence. But the resistance is still biding its time. It does not have long to wait.
It was 4 agonizing years in coming, but that dreamed of day is finally at hand. June the 6th, 1944, D-Day morning. Allied soldiers are landing on the beaches of France. In Paris, behind closed doors, over forbidden radios, Parisians hear General Eisenhower announce the long-awaited news.
Citizens of France, I am proud to have again under my command the gallant forces of France. Fighting beside their allies, they will play a worthy part in the liberation of their homeland. Because the initial landing has been made on the soil of your country, I repeat to you with even greater emphasis my message to the peoples of other occupied countries in Western Europe. Follow the instructions of your leaders. A premature uprising of all Frenchmen may prevent you from being of maximum help to your country in the critical hour. Be patient. Prepare.
D-Day evening. The streets of Paris will soon be empty. For nearly 4 years, there has been a 9 o'clock curfew. The German soldiers are uneasy now. Normandy's beaches are only 150 miles away. And General de Gaulle has sent his message to France: resistance shall continue, our great battle has begun. On August 17th, as the Allies drive toward Paris, German Commander von Haltitz, disobeying Hitler's order to demolish the city, begins pulling his troops out quietly. They retreat in trucks, trailers, tanks, any vehicles they can find. But the people of Paris will not let them retreat. Throughout the city, 50,000 soldiers of the French forces of the interior, grouped for battle, and countless thousands of Parisians join them. August 23rd, the resistance, short of food and ammunition, sends an urgent plea to the Allies for help. And while Paris again mans her famous barricades, General Bradley, to help the French recapture their pride, orders not an American, but the 2nd French Armored Division to Paris. It is a fitting honor for its commander, Major General Jacques Leclerc. Escaping from the Germans in 1940, he later marched an incredible 1,500 miles across the Libyan desert from French Equatorial Africa to fight with the Allies. As the resistance press appears on Paris streets for the first time, Commander von Haltitz issues an ultimatum. Either the fighting stops or he will order the bombing of Paris. But he is afraid that history will remember him as the man who destroyed Paris. The fighting continues. Leclerc's armored division, starting 125 miles from Paris, is meeting little German opposition. But it is slowed down by the deliriously happy French. General Bradley orders the American 4th Division to start to Paris. The competition speeds Leclerc's men. And in Paris, speedy help is needed. Here, the underarmed and underfed resistance fighters are having tough going. Thursday, August 24th, 1944. Late in the afternoon, the 2nd French Armored Division reaches the outskirts of Paris. Underground fighters point out German strongholds to the French troops. There is still major fighting ahead. French soldiers in GI uniforms move in to help the resistance fighters. And the Germans fight back. Friday, August 25th, French tanks stand at the Arc de Triomphe. At 5 p.m., General von Holtitz formally surrenders the city to General Leclerc. The French start rounding up 10,000 German garrison troops. For some, the fall of Paris is not a moment of liberation, but a reckoning. A wave of arrests sweeps over the city. Pétain ministers, members of the French Gestapo, collaborationist writers. Over 10,000 are rounded up. Years before any French girl again wears a scarf. For scarves can hide shorn heads, the badge of shame meted out to women who have fraternized with the Germans. Paris is free. the heels of the French 2nd Armored Division comes the American 4th. And like their fathers before them, the GIs are quick to discover the beauties of Paris.
Les peuples de Paris est bon et joli.
Saturday, August 26th, the citizens of a free Paris pay homage to the greatest single hero of the French resistance, Charles de Gaulle. The fervent acclamation of this day will make him head of the post-war French government. And 14 years later, in 1958, this legendary acclamation will inspire the people of France, under stress of military and political strife, to call upon Charles de Gaulle to lead them once again. With the liberation of Paris, the shame of 1940 has been wiped out. The French have won back their self-respect and pride as a nation. At Paris City Hall, General de Gaulle describes this great moment. There is a moment in every life that is never surpassed. This is such a moment. Paris, violated, enslaved, martyred. Paris is free.
Il y a là des minutes, nous le sentons tous, qui dépassent chacune de nos pauvres vies. Paris, Paris outragé, Paris brisé, Paris martyrisé, mais Paris libéré.
Allons enfants de la patrie, le jour de gloire est arrivé. Contre nous de la tyrannie, les standards sanglants élevés, les standards sanglants élevés. Entendez-vous dans les campagnes mugir ces féroces soldats? Ils viennent jusque dans nos bras, égorger nos fils et nos compagnes. Honorables citoyens, soyez au bataillon. Marchons, marchons, faisons gravure, heureux au sillon. Honorables citoyens, soyez au bataillon. Marchons, marchons, faisons gravure, heureux au sillon.
Paris is free, but much of Europe is still under Nazi control. The Allies formulate a plan to end the war in one bold, imaginative stroke. Codenamed Operation Market Garden, it calls for the biggest airborne operation in military history. It's ingenious, but fraught with problems. It ends in a tragic but gallant defeat. We look back now at the story of an airdrop at Arnhem.
Summer 1944. Victorious Allied armies race across France on a broad front, but supplies cannot keep up. In one day, the American First uses 650,000 gallons of gasoline. Logistics will do what the Nazis cannot, grind to a halt the triumphant Allied advance. Now, British Field Marshal Montgomery brings Supreme Commander Eisenhower a daring plan. A narrow front instead of a broad front. A single knife stab into Holland, bridging the Rhine, outflanking the Siegfried Line, seizing the Ruhr, the road to Berlin, and lightning victory. The key, an airborne carpet. The American 101st and 82nd dropping at Eindhoven and Nijmegen, the British 1st at Arnhem. British ground forces will roll along this carpet across 5 rivers, including the Rhine. Supplies are the problem. Montgomery wants Patton stopped in the south, the supplies to go to him. But Eisenhower says the American public would never stand for it. Patton Montgomery is a clash between two strong personalities. Patton does not stop. Montgomery wins the promise of ample supplies. Eisenhower approves Market Garden. At 24 air bases in Britain, Market, the vast and delicate airborne half, is prepared. 34,000 men, 1,500 planes, 478 gliders. But not enough. The British and a Polish brigade will have to be carried in 3 lifts on 3 successive days, a damaging shortcoming. Plans for troop dispositions and supplies also have worried American generals. Maxwell Taylor of the 101st, James Gavin of the 82nd. The British first is under Major General R.E. Urquhart. He remembers that day.
We were all extremely clear what we had to do, and we were in terrific form as regards our ability to carry out that task, because as we knew it at that time, the opposition was not going to be very great, and we thought we really shouldn't have much difficulty. Our difficulty possibly would be to get there at all in face of the enemy of air opposition.
Not air, but ground opposition is to be the fateful problem. Outside of Arnhem, remnants of 2 SS Panzer divisions, the Freundsberg and the Hohenstaufen, arrive unexpectedly for rest and refitting. The commander is Field Marshal Walter Model, the Führer's fireman, a tough, resourceful tactician.
Thus, chance set the stage for a possible Allied disaster. Airborne troops would be no match for heavy tanks. But what about Allied intelligence? Didn't they know the whereabouts of those Panzer divisions? Well, back in 1962, while looking into this question, we spoke with Henry Knapp, the intelligence chief of the Dutch underground at Arnhem.
We understand that the Dutch underground advised against this airborne operation.
As a matter of fact, Mr. Montgomery didn't ask our advice. But the British were informed, and they got the information by our radio, because some days after the landing, one of the British officers told me that they got the information of the Panzerdivision Hohenstaufen, but he didn't believe it. He said, we heard so many fairy tales of patriotic informers, and we thought it will not be true.
Britain, September 17th, 1944, 10:15 a.m. The planes and gliders will split into 2 routes, northern and southern. Otherwise, the column will string so long, enemy fighters will be able to get up in time to attack the rear, or be so wide that flak can hardly miss. It is a day this reporter cannot forget. As a United Press war correspondent, he was in one of those gliders and would drop into Eindhoven with the American 101st. Now Garden, ground half of Market Garden, prepares to move. At the Belgian-Dutch border, Lieutenant General Brian G. Horrocks, left, commanding 30 Corps, spearhead of the British Second Army, will pound up the single main highway toward Eindhoven, 15 miles, 8 hours by the timetable away. Holland, the Allied Armada overhead. One who gazes skyward on this Sunday afternoon is at his headquarters at Vught, the German commander of the 1st Parachute Army, General Kurt Student. He claims that 2 hours later, Market Garden's entire operational order was on his desk, found on the body of an American in a shot-down glider. General Brereton maintains no single soldier would carry an order of such magnitude. General Student remembers September 17th, 1944.
All of a sudden, around noon, there was, the enemy Air Force activity increased. A series of squadrons flew past our house. At first, at a distant murmur. The sound intensified until it dominated the air. That was the ominous growl of hundreds of aircraft engines. I rushed to the balcony. Wherever I looked, the sky was thick with troop carrier aircraft, camouflaged, green and dirty brown, flying in rigid formation. Gliders were towed behind many of the transports, thundering only a few hundred feet above the house. The formation seemed endless. Stretching to the horizon, the formations replaced each other, flight after flight. The sky was filled. It was the greatest armada that I had ever seen. Ah, I said to my aide, if only I had ever had such an airborne force at my command.
At Arnhem, the gliders, instead of the paratroops, go in first. They go in well. Only a few fail to make it, but among them those carrying most of the armored jeeps. The jeeps will be sorely missed in the days ahead. Now the paratroops. At Arnhem, 2,400 of them.
We had an extremely good fly-in. In fact, our drop was 100%. It couldn't have been better. Everyone came down more or less in the right place, and we couldn't have had a better start. It was a lovely day, and we started off on the right foot.
The landing areas are 5 to 8 miles from the objective, Arnhem's main bridge. The 1st Parachute Brigade is to take it. Only its 2nd Battalion gets there. 500 men, J.D. Frost commanding.
Well, my task was to take the 3 bridges leading across the Rhine at Arnhem on that first afternoon. And we got, after a certain amount of skirmishing and meeting a few Germans on the way from the dropping zone to the bridges, we actually got onto the railway bridge when it was blown by the enemy in our faces. We then got held up for quite a time by the German screen, which had very rapidly been interposed between our advance into Arnhem and ourselves. After a certain amount of fighting, we then got through and then onto the main bridge. We had a little bit of a battle there with a few chaps, and we were able to occupy the main bridge without further trouble. Well, it was then a question of taking up the best possible positions that we could on the north end of the bridge, because as long as we held the north end, we could prevent the enemy from using it, prevent them from blowing it up if they wanted to, and we could give every assistance to leading elements of 30 Corps as they came up from the south.
At Arnhem and nearby Oosterbeek are 6,000 German troops, 60 tanks, assault guns. The Dutch underground reports.
On the first day of that landing, on that Sunday, the 17th, I had at my telephone, it was an underground line that PTT had arranged for, the Dutch telephone company had arranged for, a British officer in headquarters in Oosterbeek. And I said to him, on this moment, I look out of my window and I see a Tiger tank of the Panzerdivision Hohenstaufen rolling in the direction of Oosterbeek, where your headquarters are. And then he said, no, that's impossible. Our informations say that there aren't any heavy tanks in the neighborhood. Beg pardon, sir, I said. I apologize. On this very moment, I see one big Tiger tank coming into the park of the house in which I'm speaking to you by telephone. And then he was convinced, but on that moment, they were all down, and there was nothing to do, nothing to help.
September 18th, the 2nd day. Frost and his 500, cut off, isolated, under fearful pounding, hold the north, the town end of the bridge, preventing the Germans from crossing. The Germans cannot dislodge them. The British are across the Rhine. In 24 hours, the 2nd Army's 30 Corps is due to smash to their rescue. To the south, 30 Corps reaches Eindhoven and the American 101st. It is 20.5 hours behind schedule. The single choked highway is a defender's dream. German General Student.
They tried to create a corridor, as they called it. It was like a hose, 50 kilometers long, but very narrow. What the Allies were trying to do was to pump up that hose and widen it as quickly as possible. Our objective, Field Marshal Model's in mind, was to puncture that hose, or maybe even cut it off.
At Zone, 30 Corps is stopped by a blown bridge. Sappers will rebuild it in 12 hours. But Arnhem is 45 desperate miles away. Also late, the second British lift to Arnhem, due at 10 a.m., it arrives at 3 p.m., delayed by bad weather in England. The Germans are forewarned. An SS reserve moves in, but most of the British land safely. The delay helps the Germans. They cut the routes from the landing zones to the bridge. The British are pinned down. Communications have been fouled from the start. At one time, the military has to use the BBC correspondence link to handle traffic with London. Even the Dutch underground is involved.
Mr. Knopp, when did you first believe that the cause of the airborne operation was lost?
I was sure on Monday, the 18th, because the English headquarters of Urquhart phoned to me as leader of the intelligence if he had a radio connection with London.
Asking you if you had communication with London?
Because they had a wrong code with them.
The wrong code?
Code, yes, C-O-D-E. Oh. And therefore they couldn't, they hadn't any connection with London, and if we could ask over our transmitter, underground transmitter, of course, a little thing, if we could ask for air protection for a certain part of Oosterbeek for their troops operating in the air.
And you felt that if they needed your help at that point, they must be in a bad state themselves.
Need our little civilians, amateurs as we are, if they need us, while we were waiting 5 years for them, something must be wrong.
At the bridge and in Arnhem, Colonel Frost knows how wrong things are going.
They were trying to get from one house to another, possibly mouse-holing their way through, and the whole action took place at very close quarters. I mean, we would be in one house and the Germans would be in the next house. We'd be in one garden and the Germans would be in the next. We could see their officers very often at a window across the street. The biggest problem we faced was lack of ammunition. In this very close quarter fighting, it gets used up extremely quickly. And also, of course, our anti-tank ammunition went. And that meant that these large German tanks could approach extremely closely, actually put the muzzles of their guns into the windows, and then pooped off. Very hard to hold a house when that happened. Gradually, each house in which we were was set fire to. We had no means of putting out the flames. I knew that the whole might of the army was making absolutely every effort to get up to us, and we expected to see them at any time.
The 2nd Army's 30 Corps is now 30 hours behind schedule. From zone, it moves northward, fierce, bitter miles, until at 8:30 a.m., Tuesday, September 19th, it will reach Grave, where it must cross the Maas River, 800 treacherous feet. German resistance is intense. The British are still short of the hard-pressed 82nd at Nijmegen, and far short, 20 miles, of the lone airborne battalion clinging to the bridge at Arnhem. The tragedy of resupply, General Urquhart's phrase, now besets Arnhem. Brigades protecting landing zones are under withering German attack. They are forced to move to new drop zones, but communications are still chaotic and the information doesn't get to the Air Force. September 19th, 163 planes try to bring in supplies. 13 are lost. 97 are damaged by flak. Much of 390 tons of ammunition and food falls into the preset drop zones and into German hands.
We began to realize at the end of the 3rd day that there wasn't really an awful lot of hope of joining up with those chaps at the bridge, and we had to take steps to form a perimeter ourselves in order to stop what remained of the division from being completely destroyed. And reluctantly, we had to abandon those people who were still fighting at the bridge and hoped very much that they could continue their rather lone battle until such time as the Second Army came up to them.
By September 20th, the fourth day, Urquhart has his headquarters established at the Hotel Hartenstein in nearby Oosterbeek. The hotel tennis courts serve as a POW cage for some 250 prisoners, including a lone Japanese taken at Arnhem, perhaps the only Japanese captured in action in Europe. In the perimeter, a horseshoe pocket 1,000 yards wide, 2,000 yards deep, are jammed 3,500 survivors of the 1st British Airborne, Germans on 3 sides, the Rhine River at their backs, 30 Corps 10 miles away. As it crosses the Nijmegen Bridge at 7 p.m., 30 Corps is 55 hours behind schedule. It has linked up with the hard-pressed American 82nd. 10 miles to Arnhem, and again German resistance stiffens. In Arnhem proper, the final hours for Colonel Frost and his battalion.
We were down to very little ammunition, probably not more than 4 or 5 rounds per man and 2 or 3 rounds per gun. I did hear from my General Urquhart, that he was extremely sorry, but every possible effort had been made to get through to the bridge, and this had now failed, and that I would hang on for as long as possible in my present position, in the hope that the relief would come from 30 Corps from the other side of the river.
30 Corps approaching Arnhem is stopped again. Its lead Irish Guards tanks are knocked out, blocking the narrow single road. Dawn, September 21st, Arnhem. Shells and mortar cannot do, flame and smoke do. The Germans literally burned Frost and his men into surrender. They were to have held for less than 48 hours. They have held for 3 days and 4 nights. Of 500 men, 65 are dead, 250, including Frost, wounded. Frost is among the captured. Other survivors will be hidden by Dutch patriots for months to come. The battle for the bridge at Arnhem is over. Now at the perimeter, the British dig in, pressed against the River Rhine. The pocket receives the full fury of German arms. September 21st, 22nd, 23rd, 24th, September 25th. It was a terrible, desperate day, says Urquhart. Still no relief. The end is in sight. The pocket has shrunk to 800 yards, 400 at the mouth on the river. The force has shrunk too, with many wounded. What went wrong? Here are 3 viewpoints, American, German, and British.
Of course, it's very easy to look over what caused the failure after the event and put your hand on it, but in the middle of the event itself, it's quite different. Everyone felt that the lack of aggression of 30 Corps to achieve its objectives, even within some reasonable time of what was thought to be possible, had a great deal to do with the failure. The airdrop was not sufficient. Of course, to carry out a plan like this the way we would have liked, you always want more than you can get. In theory, of course, and I think this would be a principle in any airborne operations from now on, you must drop all your combat troops at one time. And you must drop them near the objective and not 6 or 8 miles away, as Urquhart did in the drops at Arnhem. His main landing areas were, I think, 6 miles to the west. And it just doesn't work. You got to take your losses and drop it on the target.
Der schwerste Fehler,
The greatest mistake was that they jumped too far away. I call it hedging along the horizon. That's what I said to my own parachutists. Just as General Gavin said, as he wrote in his book, I told them you must, under no circumstances, hedge along the horizon. You must, under all circumstances, you must get hold of the target in a hand-to-hand battle, even if that involves losses. These losses pay back handsomely later on. Arnhem was the proof.
We never recovered from the fact that we had to land some 7 or 8 miles away from our objective. Now, that was a major factor in really determining the fate of that particular operation. It was far too far. The second was that the lifts did not come in as we hoped on time because of weather and for other reasons. The third one was, I think another major one, was that the Second Army didn't manage to get up to us in the time which was originally hoped for. We thought we would be joined within 2 days or 3 days at the very most, but in fact, as things turned out, we eventually stayed ourselves north of the river for some 9 days.
There is still a final chapter. Urquhart and his men do not surrender. The night of the 25th, faces blackened, boots muffled, they secretly evacuate through the 400-yard river gap under the German guns. 2,300 of the 10,000 men who fought at Arnhem. It is one of the miracles of the war, and it is the end of the frustration, the tragedy, and the heroism that was Arnhem.
The fortunes of war are fickle indeed. Barely 6 months after the debacle at Arnhem, fates dealt a much kinder hand to the Allies at a spot on the Rhine River named Remagen. It was an unbelievable bit of good luck for the GIs. Before we consider that remarkable incident, though, let's go back to the Germany of early 1945 to see the situation there as the Allied armies pressed ever closer.
In March 1945, Adolf Hitler's grandiose dreams of world conquest are over. Nazi officers relay his fanatical orders to the troops. Fight to the death for every inch of German soil. Desperate slogans by propaganda minister Goebbels bombard the increasingly apathetic German people. We never surrender. Triumph or slavery. Victory or Siberia. The Reich der Führer had promised would last for 1,000 years is in its death throes. The war-stunned civilians are helped by the Volksopfer, or People's Sacrifice, a relief organization. But Germany now is short of everything: food, clothing, fuel, and hope. Blood dry of their finest manpower, the Nazis create a new militia, the Volkssturm, to defend the homeland. Every available man is put into it. No one is now too young, too old, or too sick to fight under the swastika. So many members of one Volkssturm outfit are ailing that the Allies call it the Ulcer Brigade. This is the Rhine, beautiful, legend-haunted, and a vital waterway to Nazi war factories. Hitler orders it held at all costs. Germans take heart from one fact: the mountain-bordered Rhine is a natural military barrier. It hasn't been stormed by an invading army since Napoleon crossed in 1805. But now mighty armies are advancing. Montgomery's 21st Group, Hodge's 1st, and Patton's 3rd, combined into Bradley's 12th Group. A giant pincer designed to trap as many Germans as possible west of the Rhine, clearing the way for a crossing. Behind the war at the front, measures for the next step, the leapfrogging of the Rhine itself, are already underway. Expecting the Germans to blow up all bridges, the Allies plan a naval operation across the deep, treacherous river. The assault boats are trucked up as Allied commanders fight closer to the Rhine. General Charles H. Gerhardt, 29th Infantry Division commander, briefs his officers.
We've just gotten a directive from the Corps that changes our plan considerably. Instead of moving due east to secure the Corps bridgehead and make contact with the troops on this right flank, the Corps commander has decided to change his effort and move due north. with divisions abreast. Our division will be on the left. We'll move early tomorrow morning with 2 regiments abreast. The first objectives will be the original Corps bridgehead in our zone. We want to make sure that we've got full artillery support, that the air missions are set up for it properly, and that we get off and do a good, smooth job.
Tanks and doughboys advance under a metal cover of artillery fire. In one day, the Allies hurl 500,000 shells against a single enemy division. As they retreat, the stubborn Germans, with Teutonic thoroughness, blow up every bridge in the very face of their pursuers. Convinced the Nazis will leave no bridge standing, the Allies order their own planes to bomb the bridges to cut off the retreating Germans. Only one way seems left to cross the Rhine, the toughest way, by boat under fire. And then the incredible happens. At noon on March 7th, 1945, standing on the heights above Remagen, our troops look down on the blue dark Rhine and see a giant railway bridge still standing. The GIs move cautiously into the town, going cat-like from house to house, street to street. It is 1 p.m. The half-hearted German militia and Volkssturm surrender in droves. The real prize, the bridge itself, is in sight now, but its capture seems hopeless. When will they blow it up?
The German officer whose responsibility it is to have the bridge blown up is Captain Billy Brodtke. After the war, he'll be a school teacher in Germany, but on that critical day in March 1945, he's the man in history's spotlight. He will give the order to detonate the bridge. He has every intention of carrying out his mission, but then something happens.
The advancing GIs do not know that a great break is working for them. Unknown even to Captain Brodtke, the German gun battery controlling the heights above the bridge has been removed the night before. The GIs are also unaware of a second break. This one Captain Brodtke does know, that the Nazis, short of everything, have replaced the regular army explosive designed to blow up the bridge with Donnerit, a weaker industrial charge. But the veteran German engineers do not panic as the Allies fight nearer. As our troops escape across the Rhine, they place 2 explosive charges. The first is to blow a hole in the roadway to halt the American tanks. The second is to blow up the bridge itself. The first explosion blows a 30-foot crater in the roadway. The tanks halt. They open fire on the Germans across the river. Each moment seems a century. When will the bridge blow up? Now at 3:15 p.m., Captain Brodtke barks the most important order of his military career. Blow up the bridge. Nothing happens. Again he orders, blow up the bridge. Still the bridge stands. An American tank shell has miraculously cut the cable leading to the explosive. Neither side knows this. It is 3:20 p.m. At 3:25, turning tanks of the U.S. 9th Armored Division are piling up on the west bank of the Rhine. The puzzled GIs do not know the German attempt to blow up the bridge has failed. They wait, tensely, wondering, when will the bridge go up? The frightened Germans now have only one hope left, an emergency demolition charge. A sergeant is sent out to light the fuse. He does. It is 3:30 p.m. The emergency demolition charge is too weak. The bridge, shaken by the explosion, still stands. Fearing a German trap, the GIs take a long gamble, sprint across under fire. At each step, they feel a year older. This is a toll bridge, and the toll is death. Right behind the doughboys come the combat engineers, clearing the bridge of explosives. It's a lonely job up there on Bullet Boulevard, the sky above, the Rhine below. And the engineers still fear the bridge might blow up under them at any moment. First GIs across the bridge run into bitter fighting. They storm up the heights, then lob hand grenades at German defenders cornered in a railway tunnel below. It is 4 p.m. As the Americans lay down a smoke screen, the Germans trapped in the tunnel, including Bridge Commander Bratke, surrender. The smoke is to cover the movement of more men over the bridge. Only 120-foot soldiers have made the other side, and everyone knows the Germans will launch a quick counterattack to try to destroy the new bridgehead. The Germans always counterattack, and now they have to. The capture of the bridge has opened their whole homeland to peril. The bridge is badly damaged by shell fire and the emergency demolition. Under heavy German artillery fire, men of the Army's Corps of Engineers work all night to clear the weakened structure. Below the men on the girders is another team, putting heavy planking over the railroad tracks to enable our vehicles to cross. It is morning, and the bridge that was the pride of the Rhineland now is an enemy spear thrust at the heart of the fatherland. By the dawn's early light, hundreds of tanks, jeeps, and guns, thousands of soldiers, thunder across the trembling bridge through a gauntlet of shell fragments. 8,000 will cross in the first 24 hours. Across the Rhine in the town of Erpel, the GIs run into heavy house-to-house fighting. faces of German prisoners mirror a nation's numb despair. Among them are 100 Nazi engineers captured while making a suicidal night attack against the bridge. The battered Remagen Bridge cannot handle the tidal waves of arms the Allies rush to the Rhine. Engineers work around the clock to throw 2 more bridges across the swift-flowing waters. A treadway bridge is completed in 32.5 hours, a heavy pontoon bridge in just 29.5 hours. Big German guns hidden in the far hills desperately bombard the main bridge and the 2 new ones.
Feuer, Kommando! Große Ladung, NATO, ganze Batterie. Feuer, Kommando! 384 Krieg, wie viele 292. Feuerbereitschaft bilden! Erstes Feuerbereit! Gut, gutes, Feuerbereit! Gut, drittes, Feuerbereit! Gut, Batterie, Feuerbereit! Batterie, Salve! Batterie! Salve!
A new weapon enters the battle. The Germans send up one of their first jet planes of World War II to knock down the bridge. Bewildered GIs stare up at the strange noise in the sky. The jet strikes at the bridge and misses. Conventional German planes are even less lucky. On March 15th, Allied gunners knocked down 16 out of 21 enemy fighter bombers. Luftwaffe loses its feathers, the German High Command turns to weapons that cannot be intercepted. Silent, deadly, high-flying V-2 rockets. 11 of the rockets crash and explode in the bridgehead area. Generally, all they cause are sore eardrums, some lost sleep, and considerable damage to German real estate. The heavy action continues as the divisions roll, dry-footed across the Rhine. The MP platoon alone suffers 80 casualties during the action, becomes one of the few such units to win a distinguished unit citation in World War II. A furious Adolf Hitler orders a drumhead court-martial for everyone connected with the loss of the bridge. All but one man are convicted and shot. Navy landing craft, which had figured to carry the brunt of a combat invasion, are used instead as troop ferries. Their slogan, join the Navy and see Germany. The breakthrough at Remagen has opened Germany to the Allies like a surgeon's scalpel. In other areas, the Rhine still has to be breached in numerous crossings. Tough, bitter crossings under heavy fire. But the spearhead at Remagen marks the beginning of the end for Nazi Germany. March 17th, 2:55 p.m. The Remagen Bridge is closed. Engineers work feverishly to repair its weakened girders, but the big main span has been mortally wounded. Then at 3 p.m., the bridge collapse comes without warning. The causes are many. The emergency demolition, enemy shell fire, concussion from aerial bombs and rockets, the weight of 50 tons of wooden planking, and finally the vibration from 11 days and nights of constant heavy military traffic. In its wreckage, 28 brave U.S. engineers die, 63 are injured. Adolf Hitler knew what his loss of the bridge meant. 2 bridgeheads sealed the German fate, he said, one in Normandy, one at Remagen. Later, General Eisenhower said of the bridge capture, "For me, it always typified one thing, the dash, the ingenuity, the readiness at the first opportunity that characterizes the American soldier."
The dash and ingenuity of the American soldier was most personified by one of the generals who led them, a unique and controversial personality in the history of modern warfare. They called him Old Blood and Guts and wrote books and made a movie about him. He was George S. Patton, and if any man ever has, he just may have been born to make war. We go back now and recreate the story of a legendary general and his army called Lucky.
On November 8, 1942, George S. Patton leads 32,000 untried troops into North Africa, launching his first campaign of World War II. At 57, he has been a hell for leather cavalryman, organizer of the first American tank forces in World War I, student of history, deeply religious, an amateur poet, but is little known to the American public. He will soon find fame as the great gambler among modern generals, the one who loves to court the extraordinary risk. "All my life, I have wanted to lead a lot of men in a desperate battle," he has written. "I will leave the beaches either a conqueror or a corpse." By spring 1943, most of North Africa is overrun. No great planner, Patton has little patience with soldiers who go at war methodically. Find the enemy, hit him fast to get him off balance, then smite him down. That's his way. grip your weapon, don't be gripped by supply. It isn't book generalship, it's almost medieval, but it's the Patton way, and it works. July 1943, Sicily. Patton's first chance to command an army, the 7th. A flamboyant leader, his view is that a commander must communicate confidence and personal bravery. He must make the soldier feel he will be successful and make him want to kill. It takes just 38 days for Patton's 7th and the British 8th Army to win Sicily. Patton is satisfied with his own leadership. His handling of armor is already becoming legend. Of the Sicilian campaign, he writes, "If I had to fight the whole campaign over, I would make no change in anything I did." And he adds, "Few generals have ever been able to say as much." Between the two natural rivals, Patton and Britain's Montgomery, there is no love lost. Said Montgomery, there were always feelings between British and American troops. Patton's remarks from time to time did not help. Patton seems fated for controversy. An incident which mars his triumph in Sicily is described now by the chief historian, European Theater of Operations, General S.L.A. Marshall.
Caught between the 20th century view of war as something dirty and his own 18th century view that war was man's most glorious adventure, Patton had a physical revulsion against men he believed to be cowardly. He believed mistakenly, but positively, that all men are born in the same mold and that when they break down, it is voluntary. He wrote, "The greatest weapon against the so-called battle fatigue is ridicule. Any man who says he has battle fatigue is avoiding danger." He demanded much of his men and usually got it. In Sicily, unsparing of himself, he also pushed his forces in a manner described by the higher command as almost ruthless. While touring field hospitals toward the end of the campaign, he twice came upon GIs who had been evacuated from the front for nervous disorders. He upbraided them for cowardice and struck one of them about the head, sending his helmet liner flying. General Eisenhower called his conduct reprehensible, but kept him in his post. The judgment was that Patton's service to the nation far outweighed his disservice to himself. However, Patton was made to apologize to the men he affronted, the hospitals he disturbed, and to the body of his army, division by division. What had moved Patton? Some who didn't know him very well blamed frayed nerves. He himself wrote, "One sometimes slaps a baby to bring it to." 5 months after the episode, the story was broken to a shocked America. Shortly after, Patton seemed to vanish from the world scene, and it began to look as if he had been shelved. But actually, Eisenhower had picked him for a key role in the invasion of Western Europe, and he was then in England preparing for it. His mission was to shape the new Third Army. His greatest instrument, the Army with the Sunday punch. In August 1944, this hammer hit the continent, joining the Normandy breakthrough. This was the right situation, his dish of tea.
Patton has been given an army whose function is to roll right across Europe, mechanized like no other in the world. It is the Blitz Army, the army he names Lucky. The man who has said, "Battle is the most magnificent competition in which a human being can indulge, values personal glory, and never feels doubt." The First Army has provided a gap at Avranches. Patton's Third Army is ready for breakthrough. The Lucky Third explodes upon the Brittany Peninsula in 3 directions. In 2 furious weeks, it drives the fleeing Germans west into the ports of Brest and Lorient, clears the Loire River, south to Angers, and pushes east through Le Mans. To Patton, fast movement saves lives. Keep on advancing, he says, whether we go over, under, or through the enemy. The more Germans we kill, the fewer of our men will be killed. Under him, the Third goes faster, farther than any American army in history. Germans, outwitted, outmaneuvered, surrender in the tens of thousands. In 7 weeks, 40,000 square miles are liberated. As Patton's army pushes ahead across central France, his orders to the supply people are, "You keep up with me. I'm moving." Patton refuses to be fettered by logistics. He calls the third spectacular drive eastward a tour of France with an army. But the tour can last only so long as men and guns are fed and motors kept going, by supplies moving airborne or via fast express over the highway net. It is becoming more and more difficult to keep up with Patton's terrific pace. Supply begins to run short due to the distance it must travel, but Patton doesn't try to ration it. Instead, he tells his forward units to keep going until they run out of gas, then get out and walk if necessary. Finally, toward the end of September, supply problems forced the Third Army to a halt along the Moselle. Then news is received that their supplies are being diverted to Montgomery's 21st Army Group, trying for victory on the left flank. Bad news for Patton, who loathes being limited to fighting a defensive war. For his men, overstretched and tired, it is a welcome respite. No respite from strict inspection, however, especially when visited by the high command. Harshly GI, Patton requires his troops to wear helmets and ties behind combat lines. He himself loves flashy clothes, and usually the only thing GI about his uniform is his service coat. Patton is anxious to get going again. He will later write, "In practically every case, I was under wraps from the high command. The wraps will soon come off." As supplies begin to arrive, a stalemate of almost 2 months ends. Time spent catching up with Patton has also given the Germans time to man the fortress of Metz. Patton's first task is to reduce this fortress, cross the lower Moselle, and advance upon the heavily defended Saar Basin. The great tank general will now be able to prove his ability as an infantry commander. On November 8th, the new offensive begins. Metz, site of the mightiest fortress in Europe, dating back to Caesar's time, made practically impregnable by the Germans. A vicious, costly battle staged from building to building, wall to wall. For the benefit of the Germans, who now compare him to John Dillinger and Al Capone, Patton says he will take the fortress if it costs every man. The Metz assault underway, he now readies his massive attack on the Tsar, one of the greatest sustained campaigns in modern history. It will be made during the worst European weather on record. It will be a slow, costly, grueling test of skill, courage, and endurance. Patton himself describes it.
When I think of that vicious fight in which 40,000 Americans died or were wounded, beginning on the 8th of November and terminating on the 19th of December, mud rivers. We built 2,000 bridges. Your friends, your relatives, waded 20 rivers, 20 big rivers. Many of them didn't get across. Many of those who didn't get across have not been found. The rivers flow fast in that country.
The Tsar campaign is broken off by the surprise Battle of the Bulge. Patton's army must turn 90 degrees and attack 100 miles north to stem the German tide and relieve besieged Bastogne. It means desperate battle in the coldest winter in 20 years.
From the 22nd of December until the end of February, fields of snow covered with dead. Dead men in awful positions. When a man is killed at 17 below, he freezes like that. And he freezes in nasty colors. I am being as horrible as I can. I am living up to my name, perhaps. But I don't enjoy it.
On December 26th, Patton's army enters Bastogne, having accomplished the task called impossible. Hitler's last gamble is lost. Against tremendous odds, the Bulge is won. These are some of the men who won it.
What is your name?
Private Pat Brady, North Hollywood, California.
I understand you have the Purple Heart. Can you tell us something? What happened?
Well, sir, I was attached to a platoon of tanks, and we were to take a town. I happened to be in the lead tank, so here we go. Went on through that town, and our gunner had a slight case of trigger happiness, and, well, he just shot everything up, boy. It was just going ta-ta-ta-ta-ta, boom, ta-ta-ta-ta-ta-ta, boom from one side of the house to the other. Boy, houses were flying everywhere. I thought, boy, this is a breeze. Boy, look at that stuff fly. We come up to this tank trap, or it wasn't a tank trap exactly, it was a roadblock. Went on through that, and boom, something hit that tank, and she caught on fire. Well, I always did have a little trouble getting out of that hole that I'm in down there. But, boy, I'm telling you, I got out of that hole so fast I don't even remember hitting the ground. And when I woke up, I was in a ditch, and lead was flying all everywhere, and ammunition inside the tank was going off. Well, it was quite an exciting time, I'd say.
What is your name?
Sergeant Peter DeGiuseppe of Kennett Square, Pennsylvania, the World's Mushroom Center.
And what are you doing?
I am a tank commander.
Well, now, how did you spot these 88s in direct fire?
We were about 150 yards away, and it was a poor day, and it was hard to see anything. And I just happened to spot a hole just looked as big as a smokestack. I figured that they were 88, so we put a few rounds in there and blew them out.
What do you think of the war so far?
Well, sir, when you're in this war, it looks to be no end to it. Just don't look like there's any end at all.
The Third Army rolls on, breaches the Siegfried Line, which Patton calls the famous monument to the stupidity of man. It is the end of February 1945. Now the warrior who accepts no pay and assigns his paycheck directly to the Army Relief Society plans perhaps his greatest campaign, the Palatinate. Just 6 weeks after smashing the German offensive in the Battle of the Bulge, with one mighty blow, his Third Army will break the back of German resistance in the West. In just 10 days, the Third Army overruns 10,000 miles of enemy ground, destroys 2 German armies, and envelops the entire Palatinate. By March 22nd, the Tsar has been taken, the war west of the Rhine won. Soon on both sides of the Rhine, the enemy is a beaten mass of confused humanity. As German reserves are overrun, the stream of prisoners to the rear swells to a river. The liberation of concentration camps reveals the Nazi abomination to the world. Patton will order German officials here to see what horror the swastika has wrought. His soldiers are detoured here so that they too will not forget. By May 1945, in 9 months of fighting, the Third Army has gone farther, captured more prisoners, crossed more rivers, liberated more friendly territory than any other army ever before in American history. On May 5th, the rolling Third enters Pilsen, Czechoslovakia. Final mission accomplished. In 4 days, the war in Europe will be over, and Patton will write to his army, "The one honor that is mine, and mine alone, is that of having commanded such an incomparable group of Americans." As the Third Army stacks arms, Patton knows he has been to his last war. He broods about it, feeling that if he had been turned loose, he would have had more glory. To his wife, he has written, "I love war and responsibility and excitement. Peace is going to be hell on me." For the soldier called by the German High Command, the most modern and most dangerous general on all fronts, the time for ceremony has come. Generals like Nikanor Zagvachev have to be decorated. Later he will write, "I unquestionably drank the Russian commander under the table and walked off under my own steam." Patton believes all good soldiers desire glory and enjoys decorating his own men.
At this point, I want to correct a grave illusion. You don't have to be dead to be a hero. People always talk about heroic dead. Well, damn it, there are a lot of heroic alive ones. I'm trying to bring back to you the fact what these soldiers have given. Damn it, it's no fun to say to men that you love, go out and get killed. And we've had to say it. And by God, they have gone. And they have won. But I want you to remember that the sacrifice that these men have made must not be in vain.
On October 6, 1945, Patton is forced to say farewell to his Third Army. His slowness in removing local Nazi administrators, climaxed with a careless remark comparing Nazis to losers in an election between Republicans and Democrats, has resulted in his removal from his beloved command. For the fiery grandson of a Confederate officer killed at Cedar Creek, for the fighter who has modeled himself after Stonewall Jackson, the time hangs heavy as he assumes command of the 15th Army, largely a paper organization. He had expected a glorious death in battle. The best end for an old campaigner, he says, is a bullet at the last minute of the last battle. In practice for the 1912 Olympics, he had broken the world's record for pistol shooting. Visiting Sweden late in November, he shoots once more against his old competitors in the games.
Patton returned from Sweden seeking as ever an outlet for his tremendous energy. Sunday morning, December 9, found Germany wrapped in impenetrable fog. But Patton had planned a day of pheasant shooting, and he had to have it. He was accompanied by his beloved old friend and chief of staff, General Hobart Gay. At a fog-bound intersection near Neckarstadt, Patton's speeding staff car smashed into an Army truck. His head hit the back of the front seat, and he fell across the lap of his friend, Happy Gay. "Are you hurt?" asked Patton, and then he added, "I think I'm paralyzed. Work my fingers for me." He was rushed to a hospital. X-rays revealed a broken neck. For days, he appeared to stage a miraculous recovery, and then complications set in. And 4 days before Christmas, the end came. His last words, whispered to his wife, Beatrice, were, "It's too dark. I mean too late."
On a pine-clad bluff near Ham, Luxembourg, General Patton was laid to rest among his own soldiers. His grave is on the high ground, and he abides with his troops.
A general who loved war, a bridge at Remagen, an airdrop at Arnhem, the liberation of Paris. These are but a few of the chapters in the enormous saga of the last time that the world was at war. There are many other stories to be told, and we'll endeavor to do so on this CBS Video Library of World War II.